Sometimes criminals manage to so masterfully conceal evidence of their crimes that it becomes a real puzzle for law enforcement, complicating the understanding of the complete picture of events. Detectives are forced to make extraordinary efforts, which causes investigations to drag on for long periods. Far from always can relatives provide protection, circumstances can turn out catastrophically unfortunate, but sometimes it's precisely those who should be protecting who instead push toward a tragic ending. In this material, we will tell the story of how one random incident caused one of the most horrific episodes in the criminal chronicle of the Latin American region. Luiza Fernanda Garcés was born in Colombia. Her mother was Diana, her father was Giovanni. The family lived in the Villa Maria neighborhood in the department of Caldas, Colombia. Luiza had a younger brother, Juan Esteban, who was 2 years younger than his sister. The children maintained close relationships from an early age, got along wonderfully with each other, and always helped one another. The children's father, Giovanni, was almost constantly busy with work, laboring in warehouse facilities. The man tried in every way to keep the family afloat, regularly working night shifts and returning home only in the morning. On such days, he would rest until evening, after which he would head back to work. The work was extremely exhausting, but Giovanni always found opportunities to pay attention to his loved ones. Diana, Luiza's mother, was unemployed most of the time, engaged in household management and raising the children. Grandparents played a significant role in the family's functioning, especially relatives from the father's side. Everyone lived near each other, so the children regularly visited them and often stayed overnight. Everyone who was closely acquainted with Luiza characterized her as a compassionate, intelligent, and energetic child. At school, she demonstrated diligence and responsibility, achieving excellent results in all academic subjects. The student understood that education would be the key to future prosperity and would allow her to live in more comfortable conditions than her parents. Additionally, Luiza was noted for her sociability, finding herself a reliable circle of close friends with whom she studied and spent her free time. The children understood each other well and always maintained close contact, but in January 2014, disturbing changes began. Numerous people noticed that the girl suddenly began to distance herself from her usual environment. Previously active and sociable, Luiza transformed into an irritable and even hostile person. It seemed she was constantly looking for reasons to argue. Many explained this as manifestations of adolescence. The girl increasingly conflicted with her peers and questioned the authority of teachers. Because of Luiza, who had never created problems before, numerous difficulties began in her class. The situation escalated to such a degree that in July 2014, the school administration approached the teenager's family with a demand to remove her from school, as she significantly interfered with other students and negatively affected them. The former exemplary student began falling behind in most academic subjects and fundamentally changed. The family tried to have conversations with her and find out the reasons, but the girl was secretive and emotionally unavailable. She categorically refused communication and didn't want to explain the reasons for the radical change in her behavior. Luiza's father worried the most. The man repeatedly tried to organize private conversations with his daughter and understand the essence of the problem. He deeply worried, remembering his gentle and kind daughter, who had now become so harsh that she stopped smiling altogether. Unfortunately, even Giovanni, with whom the girl had particularly close relationships, couldn't achieve success. She persistently refused to tell anything. The man had no choice but to agree with the idea that this was how adolescence and hormonal changes manifested in his daughter. By August 2014, he and Diana had already been divorced for 8 months. The main reason for the breakdown of family relationships was the woman's problems with alcohol. Additionally, he suspected that his wife was cheating on him. The man could no longer tolerate Diana's behavior, who systematically abused alcohol and demonstrated extreme irresponsibility, including toward the children. On these grounds, after the divorce, he took custody of Luiza and her younger brother Juan Esteban, raising them as a single father, while the mother moved to another city and enjoyed her new life. The situation wasn't improving, so Giovanni concluded that his daughter might be helped by a change of environment. He turned to his sister Maria, who lived with her mother in a neighboring city. The woman readily agreed to help her brother and take Luisa to stay with her for some time. Initially, she regularly called Giovanni and reported that everything was fine with Luisa and her behavior had somewhat improved. However, when the girl got used to the new environment, she again became more withdrawn and aggressive. Maria suspected something was wrong, so she turned to social services. A psychologist worked with Luisa and later informed Maria of disturbing information. In his professional opinion, the girl's psychological state corresponded to that of a teenager who had experienced sexual assault. Maria didn't know how to react to such information, so she immediately called her brother and shared the established facts. The man was stunned by the social worker's statement. He didn't want to even suppose that his daughter could have become a victim of assault, but he realized that her behavior really looked very much like it. Luisa's mother, on the contrary, reacted more restrainedly and calmly, but Giovanni deeply worried about his daughter and tried to understand how this could have happened and who might be involved in this situation. Now he sought to establish whether the social worker's assumption corresponded to reality. First, he had a detailed discussion of this situation with his sister and came to the decision that it was necessary to organize a direct conversation with his daughter and ask specific questions. Some time passed. On August 19, 2014, his daughter returned to her father. The man initiated a difficult conversation. Giovanni decided not to sidestep the issue and asked directly, had she really become a victim of sexual assault? The girl couldn't utter a single word and only burst into tears. The father realized that this indeed corresponded to reality. Finally, the child's resentment, suffering, and irritation broke out, and she revealed the whole truth to Giovanni. According to Luisa's account, at the end of January 2014, when her father once again went to his night work shift, her mother Diana was visited by her friend Janet. The women began drinking alcoholic beverages, and after some time, a man arrived at the house whom Luisa had never met before. He brought additional alcoholic drinks with him, acted as if he had long been acquainted with the whole company, was warmly welcomed, and now the three of them were drinking alcohol together. When the alcoholic drinks ran out, Diana and Janet simply fell asleep on the couches, having significantly overdone it with alcohol. Their male acquaintance energetically got up, he was much less intoxicated than the rest of the company, turned to Luisa and Juan Esteban, suggesting they take a walk to a food stand and taste some hot dogs. It turned out that it wasn't difficult to convince the two children. They readily set out with the stranger to the nearest fast food establishment located near the house. Both trusted him because they observed how casually and friendly their mother interacted with him. The entire trio ate hot dogs and then returned to the house. At that time, Diana and Janet were still sleeping on the couches. All this was happening late in the evening, so the children also felt tired. Returning from their walk, they immediately headed to their shared bedroom to rest. However, almost immediately, this unfamiliar man entered the room and offered Juan Esteban 50,000 Colombian pesos. By the standards of that period, this represented payment for a full day's work, so it proved to be an extremely tempting sum for the younger child. The man handed the money to the schoolboy and asked him to go sleep with his mother. Not suspecting the stranger's intentions, Juan Esteban took the money and left the room. The man ordered him not to return under any circumstances. Fortunately, the boy couldn't fall asleep, and within a few minutes, he heard his sister's voice. Her muffled crying came from the children's room. Juan Esteban returned to the room and observed the unfamiliar man, who was naked in bed with Luisa. Not understanding what was happening, the brother became confused, and this diverted the rapist's attention. The sister raised an alarm and drove him away. What's strange is that their mother slept so deeply that even after this, she didn't appear and didn't check what was happening with the children. After this incident, Luisa told her brother that he must not tell anyone about what had happened. The girl believed this could lead to serious problems. Both kept this terrible secret for several months. Juan Esteban was still very young and didn't properly understand what had actually occurred, while Luisa didn't share any details, keeping all the resentment inside herself. After this story, his daughter's behavior became clear to Giovanni. The man understood why his daughter had become so withdrawn and hostile during that particular period. Naturally, he felt rage over Diana's actions, who had allowed a barely known person to stay in the house with the children while he was at work. Giovanni accused her of being the one who caused the girl's rape by getting drunk and falling asleep. The father was afraid to imagine what could have happened, what would have occurred if his son hadn't woken up and frightened the rapist. After all, the children had been under the criminal's control all evening and had even left the house with him. At that time, the couple was already divorced. However, Giovanni didn't immediately call Diana and tell her about all the circumstances, also accusing her of what had happened. The woman took a defensive position, claiming she had no idea that something like this could have happened. She insisted that she didn't even know this person's name, since he wasn't her close acquaintance. The whole group had only met a few times, but actually he was Janet's friend. Giovanni understood that his ex-wife was simply protecting the criminal, and for him, this became an even greater shock. Coming to his senses from the shock, the father didn't intend to accept the circumstances, so he took Luisa and went with his daughter for a medical examination. He sought to conduct a medical examination of the girl and officially document the fact of the attack on the child in order to contact law enforcement. For moral support, Giovanni took his father Alfredo with him, who also had particularly close relationships with Luisa. When the elderly man learned about the rape, he was also stunned and shocked, just like the child's father. The men completed all necessary procedures and filed a report with the police, then returned home. Now they awaited news from law enforcement, hoping to bring the criminal to justice as quickly as possible. The very next day, August 20th, 2014, Giovanni went to his usual night shift at the warehouse facilities. When he returned after such nights, he had no energy for anything. Usually he immediately went to sleep. This is what happened that morning as well. He saw his daughter when she was doing her homework. They both talked a little, after which the man announced he was going to rest because he needed to restore his strength. This meant he would wake up around 7 or 8 p.m., no earlier. Luisa was left on her own during this time. Her grandfather or grandmother regularly visited her. Usually, she found activities for herself and didn't leave the house. When he woke up, Giovanni didn't find his daughter. However, he wasn't worried because the girl could have gone to the man's parents, who lived nearby. He himself went to his night shift again. Already at his workplace, he called his father Alfredo. He simply wanted to make sure everything was okay with Luisa, but received the answer that the grandfather hadn't seen his granddaughter. She had visited him in the morning and then returned home. Giovanni felt anxiety. He didn't want to give in to panic, so he contacted all acquaintances and relatives who might have information about Luisa and could tell him where she was, but none of them had seen the girl. Luisa's brother had spent the entire day at his grandfather's. Now the father felt strong concern. He asked for time off from work and together with his parents began searching for his daughter. Giovanni and Alfredo were very worried because they assumed that Luisa was still in danger. The case with the rapist remained unresolved. The teenager's behavior now didn't seem as unexpected as before. On August 21, 2014, after a whole night of fruitless searching, Alfredo and Giovanni again arrived at the police station, but now with the purpose of filing a missing child report. Both men didn't plan to leave the matter unattended. Immediately after filing the report, they prepared announcements and printed many flyers. Photos of Luisa with descriptions and missing person notices were immediately posted throughout the city in hopes that this would help obtain information. That same day, several phone calls came in from witnesses. People claimed they had spotted Luisa. They named other towns, stated that she was either wandering the streets or was in the company of several men. All this sounded alarming but provided hope. Unfortunately, checking the information yielded no results. Giovanni became increasingly restless. He couldn't even properly rest or eat, worrying that something terrible had happened to his daughter. Law enforcement workers also didn't remain idle. Having received the appeal, they immediately began searching for Luisa. Investigators treated the circumstances extremely seriously, especially considering the rape report. All this didn't look like an ordinary coincidence. The girl had visited a medical facility the day before the attack, where the fact of rape was confirmed. Learning about this, the criminal might have tried to eliminate the witness so she couldn't give testimony against him in court. But how could the perpetrator have learned about everything so quickly? Unfortunately, no one had information about where this person lived or what his name was. There was extremely little information about the rapist. However, there were several people who could tell more. Police turned to Diana's friend Janet. She informed detectives that at the beginning of January, she and Diana were drinking beer after their work shift. Suddenly, the woman received a call from an unknown number. But when she picked up the receiver, she immediately calmed down because she recognized the familiar voice of some hairdresser. This was a young man she had met approximately 7 years before these events. Judging by the nature of the conversation, he wanted to meet and talk with Diana, was ready to bring alcohol with him, so the woman readily accepted his proposal. This revealed Diana's lie, who actually had known this man for a long time. He wasn't acquainted with Janet. Now police went to her. The woman admitted that this was her former partner, who had been released from prison at the beginning of January 2014. While he was behind bars, she had visited him several times, but later the couple ended their relationship. When Luisa's father learned all the details, he was furious and couldn't understand how she had allowed such a dangerous person near her children. But at that moment, he was primarily interested in where Luisa was. Diana continued to protect the probable criminal, was taciturn and told detectives that she didn't know his full name. Everyone who knew him called him Peluco. When investigators tried to learn more information from the woman, she became hostile and categorically refused to reveal details of her personal life and past. Even despite the fact that this could help in searching for her daughter, it seemed the woman was indifferent to the fate of the 13-year-old girl. Unfortunately for the police, neither Diana nor Janet could provide enough information to find this person. This became a real shock for Giovanni and Alfredo, who continued searching throughout this entire period. Luisa's grandfather even changed his appearance to look like a homeless person and visited criminal neighborhoods of the city to blend in with locals, hoping to obtain information there. However, the man never managed to find out anything. On August 26, 2014, a witness contacted the police station. He was a fisherman who that morning had found a human body on the shore of Yérico, Cauca. When investigators arrived at the scene, they discovered a damaged body that was scattered over a large area. It appeared that wild animals had found it first. Initially, most of the remains couldn't be found. They found legs that were tied together with shoelaces. All of this was in a bag. Inside they found a strand of hair. The meager evidence was carefully collected and taken for identification. Missing person reports in this region that had come in recently were analyzed. The most matching description was Giovanni and Alfredo's appeal about the missing girl. The clothing on the body matched the appearance of the missing person. DNA samples were taken from Luisa's father for further comparison with the remains. 2 months later, in October, the conclusions were received. The human remains found on the shore of Yérico were identified as Luisa. By this time, more body parts had been found, and a detailed forensic examination was conducted, which determined that the schoolgirl died as a result of a powerful blow to the right side of her head. The girl's relatives wept when they received this news. Apparently, Alfredo reported that in all his long life, this was the most tragic event he had ever encountered. Both men sought justice, but the results of the conducted investigation were disappointing. On the girl's body, due to water exposure, no foreign DNA traces were found. No biological substances. It was even unclear whether she had been raped before death. No fingerprints or any other evidence for analysis were found on the bag, and the hair turned out to belong to the girl. No clues pointing to a suspect existed. Still, they couldn't even establish the full name of the man who had raped Luisa and was probably involved in her death. The 66-year-old grandfather of the murdered girl, Alfredo, decided to act in his own way. He placed a half-lowered black and white flag on the facade of his home. According to his explanations, the white color meant his granddaughter's purity, and black meant mourning. Alfredo declared that he wouldn't remove the flag until those guilty of her death were arrested. But the man didn't stop his actions there. In the upper section of the home's facade, he placed a cross with purple edges that reflected his suffering. The side sections of the cross were decorated with green garlands, and the center with red. The former meant hope that law enforcement would find the guilty parties. The latter embodied the blood spilled by his granddaughter. However, when an official conclusion was made that a teenager's murder had occurred, they returned to the investigation with new determination. Detectives continued interrogating one after another of the victim's family acquaintances. Unexpected information came from one of the girl's friends, a classmate named Luiza Fernanda. The student reported that he had observed his friend on the day she disappeared. Luiz knew that Giovanni had returned from his night shift and was resting when he came to visit his daughter. At a certain moment, she said she needed to find her uncle. Luiz stated he would help his friend accomplish this. They went out together to search and stopped near a hot dog stand. By description, this was the same place where the rapist had brought her and her brother in January. After the classmate's statement, police went to the hot dog stand and spoke with the vendor named John Ords. The man reluctantly engaged in dialogue but remembered Luisa and her friend who had visited him several months earlier. Later, it became clear why the vendor didn't want to cooperate with the investigation. John himself had served time for a minor crime. However, they managed to convince the new witness. He remembered the teenagers well because the girl was trying to get her uncle's phone number from him. She described to him one of the men who had come with 2 children to the stand late in the evening in January. Of course, this was about the walk before Luisa's rape. As it turned out, he remembered this story and knew that man because he had sold him his old motorcycle. He even still had his phone number. John dictated the number to Luisa. She called and arranged to meet with him. According to the classmate, all this happened around 8:30 p.m. So he was happy for his friend that she had found her uncle, and he went home because he didn't want to get in trouble with his parents. According to John, after this, Luisa remained near the stand alone. She was waiting for her uncle. After some time, he arrived on a motorcycle. The girl ran up to him and talked with him about something. After this, she got on the motorcycle. Both drove off in an unknown direction. According to John, a few days later he saw Luisa's image on a missing person notice. But only now did he connect all these events. Investigators were stunned that so many people knew who they were talking about, but no one could even fully name the suspect. At the same time, people from the mysterious stranger's closest circle generally talked about him very reluctantly. As if they were afraid of something. After the classmates and hot dog vendors' stories, even more questions arose. Why was Luisa so actively searching for this man? Why did she call him uncle and interact with him? Why did she go with a dangerous person? All this sounded absurd. Another important feature added confusion. Luiza Fernanda claimed he left his friend near the hot dog stand at 8:30 p.m. John said she met with this unknown man on a motorcycle at 7:45 p.m. Who was lying or mistaken remained a mystery. In any case, it was necessary to obtain this person's name. Police again returned to analyzing the information they possessed. Since Luisa's mother claimed she had visited this person in prison, an opportunity arose to track these visits. They decided to check this direction, but researching the archives took even more time. In December 2014, detectives established that Diana had visited Gabriel Jaime Sepúlveda. At that time, he was 43 years old. After studying the main suspect's past, they managed to establish why everyone said they didn't know who they were talking about. Starting from 1995, he had been a repeat offender, committing various crimes, the most brutal of which turned out to be the murder of a university student in Bogotá. Additionally, there were robberies, assaults, accusations of domestic violence, illegal weapons possession, prison escape, as well as several episodes for which his guilt couldn't be established. Overall, Peluco had been arrested 13 times and tried 8 times. He was released for murder at the very end of 2013. At the same time, he had many women and 3 children. All this didn't match the witnesses' words, but they suspected that they were not only intimidated, but Gabriel himself provided false information about himself. When this person's photograph was shown to the murdered girl's brother, 11-year-old Juan Esteban, the boy immediately recognized him. Checking the phone number they got from the hot dog vendor, they also managed to establish a connection to Gabriel. John saw his photo and also recognized him. All this confirmed that he was Luiza's rapist and the last person to see her alive. But was he the child's killer? There was no direct evidence against the suspect. Investigators began analyzing his phone records. They tracked geolocation and established that the mobile phone was detected exactly in the place where they found the girl's body. On August 21, around 5:30 p.m., probably the day after her disappearance, he tried to dispose of the body there. Finally, an arrest warrant was issued for Gabriel, but when police tried to find him, this proved more difficult than initially seemed. Information about the criminal was extremely limited. He wasn't found at known addresses. It was known that he worked as an assistant worker in a cafe in the countryside. But even there, workers provided no valuable information. The mobile phone that the hot dog vendor had provided was also turned off. However, they didn't have to wait long. In May 2015, Gabriel was arrested when he appeared for another hearing on one of his numerous crimes. Now 2 points were added to the list: rape of an underage girl and her murder. He faced 33 to 50 years in prison. Not surprisingly, Gabriel refused to admit guilt in Luiza's death. This delayed the court process because the prosecution planned to gather as much evidence as possible, even if indirect. The lawyer made a large contribution to the delay as well. In total, they managed to delay hearings for 2 years. Throughout this entire period, the defense made efforts to present Gabriel as a victim of police arbitrariness. There really was no direct evidence of his involvement in the murder. Therefore, lawyers tried to present him as a scapegoat whom police focused on because there were no other leads. Gabriel never showed remorse for committed crimes, didn't confess, but made efforts to avoid punishment. The man tried to prove that he wasn't even in the city during Luiza's disappearance. At the same time, he presented his victim's mother as a sex worker whose services he regularly used. This is how he explained his appearance in the house in January 2014, but denied that he had molested the girl. The key prosecution witness became hot dog vendor John, who had seen Gabriel leave with Luiza on a motorcycle. Unfortunately, the witness didn't appear in court. According to his mother, John had found a new job and moved. But it was believed this happened due to pressure from Gabriel and threats. He simply refused to testify against the criminal. Police managed to establish that he had served time and had once been Gabriel's cellmate. Therefore, he knew his cruel nature well and simply feared for his life. Other prisoners also feared Gabriel, who claimed in prison that he was a sorcerer and used black magic. The hearings began. The prosecution argued that Gabriel had deceived the girl and taken her to the shores of Yérico. The man became enraged with her when he learned that her father had filed a report against him with police. There he smashed her skull, tied her legs with shoelaces, and threw her into the water. After which he disappeared from the scene. Testimony and the defendant's mobile phone data were provided as confirmation. As a result of the trial, the killer was sentenced to 46 years in prison for murder. 2 years later, 9 years were added to this sentence for rape. Despite the fact that the girl's family achieved justice, many questions remained unanswered. After all, the criminal never confessed. Why did she call Gabriel uncle? Why did she so readily meet with him and go with the man on a motorcycle? Police assumed that the girl wanted to meet with him to inform him that they had filed a report against him with police. Probably, she didn't fully realize how risky this could be. After these events, Giovanni still believed that not all the guilty parties had answered for the crime. He blamed his ex-wife for the suffering his daughter experienced, as well as for her death. But it seemed the woman simply wasn't bothered by any of this. Although many condemned Diana for her negligence, which cost the girl her life, the woman was never held accountable. This case remains one of the most tragic examples of how parental negligence and criminal predation can destroy an innocent life. While justice was ultimately served with Gabriel's conviction, the preventable nature of this crime continues to haunt all those involved. That's all for now. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future content. Take care and goodbye.